There was a video recently from KDH that I want to talk about. If you missed it, I will link it in the description below, but what he talked about was the Quad Cortex, its development, and why it's in trouble. Well, is it in trouble? Sort of. Let's talk about it. First off, I want to give thanks to KDH for a great video. He covered this topic in detail, and I don't want to retread what he already stated. I also pretty much agree with everything in that video, so this isn't some weird KDH is wrong video. Besides, he seems like a pretty okay guy, so that's not what I'm doing here. I just want to throw my 2 cents into this conversation because there's a few things that I want to bring up. To recap briefly, again, I'd suggest KDH's video if you want more detail. 𝗦𝗇𝗏 is primarily a software-based company that was started by the founder of Dark Glass. Dark Glass makes products for bass, like amplifiers and pedals. Some of the best bass gear out there, if I'm being honest. And it made a lot of sense for them to step out and start expanding into guitar effects via software. The idea behind 𝗦𝗇𝗏 was always to make a hardware multi-effects unit that could last 20 years into the future. That might come up later. And the plugins were a way to fund that project, according to CEO Doug Castro.
But also, aware that the hardware project could be extremely expensive and long to develop, we knew that we had to keep the lights on somehow, which is why 𝗦𝗐𝗔𝗔's idea of making plugins first was such a key one. Plugins would not only generate cash flow for the company to help fund the long-term R&D investments, but would also help us build the awareness and credibility we'd need to launch the Quad Cortex.
This is important to understand because with the lack of support that was expected for the Quad Cortex and the missing features at launch, you can look at this statement and kind of guess what's going on behind the scenes. Now, I would be very curious to see what the sales are like on the Quad Cortexes currently and if they've slowed down at all. I can only view the used market, and it seems that more and more of them are becoming available secondhand, leading me to believe that the unit that was hyped as the next big thing in the digital multi-effects space is slowing down, or at a minimum that a portion of their early adopters are abandoning ship. Meanwhile, they're continuing to release plugins, which we know from the previous statement are the main revenue source for 𝗦𝗇𝗏. And when 𝗦𝗇𝗏 releases a firmware 2.0 update and the biggest feature in the update is hybrid mode and global EQ, something weird is going on. So for context, let's look at one of 𝗦𝗇𝗏's competitors, Fractal Audio, the makers of the Axe effects. Since the Quad Cortex was announced, Fractal Audio has updated the Axe effects a lot of times, including several full version updates. And what did the updates include? Did they fix the global EQ? Well, how about improving the algorithms which the whole unit are based off of? They also have several quality of life improvements and tons of added content. The reason I bring this up is because Fractal has never had to release plugins to fund this development. Fractal Audio actually only makes hardware and the accompanying software to edit on it, something that 𝗦𝗇𝗏 has yet to deliver on. So if a software-based company that's aspiration was to transition to hardware has failed to support the hardware in favor of producing more software to generate revenue, wouldn't it be unfortunate if something major happened to computers that caused them to have to completely focus their attention elsewhere?
Wouldn't that be a big problem?
In 𝗦𝗇𝗏's latest development update, Francisco, the other founder, addresses the delay in making their plugins native to Apple Silicon. He notes that porting their existing plugins is the first objective they have at the moment. He does state that the Quad Cortex is still a priority and updating and optimizing all of their current plugins will move the compatibility with the Quad Cortex along, but to a skeptical hippo like me, it reads like this: plugin company overpromises on new hardware. During final stages of launch, global pandemic throws a wrench in plans. Plugin company makes more plugins to generate revenue. Massively delayed global launch pushes back development and support for new hardware. Apple Silicon is released and now plugin company is spread thin. Plugin company decides to prioritize plugins to keep plugin users buying plugins. And hardware owners are put on the back burner again since 𝗦𝗇𝗏 already has your money. Look, this has got to be a tricky situation to navigate, and I don't think that piling on 𝗦𝗇𝗏 really does any good. And that leads me to the ultimate topic of this video. Is the Quad Cortex in trouble? Well, yeah, the Quad Cortex has been in trouble for a while. And while we should give credit to Doug and his team for releasing updates to the Quad Cortex that improved upon its anemic effects selection and general user requested features, the fact that these weren't present at launch and that the promised features still aren't there makes it kind of hard to believe that this product will be viable in the next 20 years. Especially when you compare it to something like the Axe FX3, which is constantly being updated with new improvements and features. And also the big curveball is there are a lot of modelers that are coming out probably in the next couple of years that are going to have the same features that made the Quad Cortex unique. And I have to add this in there as well. While developing a piece of hardware that can last 20 years into the future sounds great on paper, it's a little overly ambitious, especially because of the rate at which technology develops. And if you want some context for this, just look at the computers that came out in 2003 versus the computers of today. They're dramatically different. But the more important question is 𝗦𝗇𝗏 in trouble? No, I don't think they are. The reason I don't think they are is the same reason that I think the Quad Cortex was such a big hit in the first place, and that's their marketing. Look at it this way, they are masters of getting you to buy reskinned 𝗦𝗍𝗔 and 5150 amp sims by partnering with popular artists. And in fairness, their design aesthetics and quality really is what sets them apart from their competitors. They've really emulated Apple's design and marketing philosophy, and it works well for them. I mean, all they have to do to generate hype is post a backlit picture where you can't see any detail with the ominous "soon" text. And their loyal fan base loses their minds trying to figure out what the next redundant plugin is going to be. And aside from that, the people who are still in defense of the Quad Cortex look at it as a 20-year piece of hardware that was promised, so they are already okay waiting for launch features. I've actually had Quad Cortex defenders in the comments of my videos justify their purchases comparing it to being an investor in the stock of a company, which is a really weird way to look at it. Buying a Quad Cortex in no way gives you any sort of stake in Neural DSP as a company. But all of that aside, I still think Neural DSP could pull this out of the fire and wow us with a 3.0 update that will over-deliver on the promises they made over 3 years ago. I also think Bigfoot is real. As for myself and my recommendation on the Quad Cortex, I'd say skip it. There's currently nothing that sets it apart aside from its design philosophy, and if that's important to you, then maybe that justifies the purchase. And if you are really interested in capturing hardware, which is the edge the Quad Cortex had when it was announced, then you can do it using 𝗏𝗏𝗋X for a fraction of the cost. I mean, 𝗏𝗏𝗋X really is the cheapest option out there for hardware modeling, right guys? Guys?